Hello, everyone. Before we begin, I want to announce that our event will be offered in English and Spanish. Most of our panelists will be speaking in Spanish. You will note at the bottom of your screen, there's an icon where you can change your audio to the language that you need. If you have any questions, you can let us know in the chat. Antes de empezar, quiero decirles que si necesitan...
Before starting, I wanted to say if you need interpretation, there's a button, a globe in the bottom, and you can press it. And if you need help, please send a chat message.
I'm going to speak a little bit in English
and
go into Spanish. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm incredibly happy to be welcoming you all from different parts of the United States, different parts of the world. I am Juan de Lara, Director of the Center for Latinx and Latin American Studies at the University of Southern California. Today's event is part of a partnership between our center and the Equity Research Institute, and we would like to extend a special thank you to Professor Manuel Pastor for partnering with us on this event. Together, we are working with community-based organizations, migrant advocacy groups, and scholars to address in a more humane and a more just way the issues that migrants, their families, and their communities must face as they are subject to state policies that continue to expand deportations across the hemisphere. Over the past year, we have seen the violent ways that migrants from Central America and Haiti have been treated at the border. As we will discuss today, there are many more injustices happening every day in communities across the Americas, communities who are struggling with the consequences of mass deportations. Today's panel will include an emerging network of social justice centers, or Corredores de Justicia in Latin America, the United States, and Canada, who are focused on hemispheric migration, economic justice, and deportation. Before we begin, I want to hand it off to Jody Agius Vallejo, who's the Associate Director of the Equity Research Institute at USC. Jody.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hola, buenas tardes. I am
Hello, good afternoon.
Vallejo. I am Associate Professor of Sociology and American Studies at USC and also Associate Director of the Equity Research Institute, where our mission is to use data and analysis for equity and social change. We're very excited to be partnering with Professor Juan de Lara and the USC Center for Latinx and Latin American Studies, as well as Endalon, one of our most important community partners, for this important conversation about how deportation has exacerbated inequalities in Latin America and how scholars, activists, and community organizations can collaborate to address hemispheric issues of racial and economic justice. I want to acknowledge our director, Manuel Pastor, as well as our amazing staff at ERI who've worked tirelessly to put this panel together for you, especially Lauren Perez and Emma Yudelovich, and our other staff working behind the scenes today, as well as the staff at Endalon and the Center for Latinx and Latin American Studies. So thank you so much to all of you for all of your work as we come together today to discuss this critical issue. Also want to give a shout out to my students who are here today joining us. And now I'm very pleased to pass it back to my friend and colleague, Professor Juan de Lara, who will be moderating this important conversation today.
Thank you, Jody. We want to acknowledge that the University of Southern California sits on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Tongva Gabrielino people. The colonization of this land reflects the systems of power upon which this country was founded and which continue to operate today. We honor the Tongva and all indigenous people, past, present, and future, for their continued survival and contributions to our society. We share these acknowledgements to pay respect to the original caretakers of this land, to raise awareness about histories that are too often erased or forgotten, to recognize our place in this history, and to affirm our commitment to social justice. Please take a moment to feel the ground under your feet and honor the land and the people who have served as caretakers. Thank you. Bueno, para mí es un placer.
For me, it's a pleasure to introduce Pablo Alvarado, is the Executive Director of the National Networks for Jornaleros and Jornaleras, known as NDLON. Pablo is a great fighter for justice, a migrant from El Salvador, and also he plays guitar before the Jornaleros del Norte band. And so then, Pablo, welcome. One of the things that I have asked Pablo is to help us to answer some questions. In fact, why are the academics, students, and members of the community should think in hemispherically about migration and social justice? Thank you, Pablo, for being with us.
Thank you
So much for this presentation, and thank you everyone that has made this event possible. I am a co-director of Endelon together with Maria Marin and Angela Zambrano. Before starting, I'd like to tell you about what this national network of day laborers does. It is a group of different community organizations that work together organizing the day laborers, jornaleros in Spanish. The term jornalero, day labor, it's a bit different in the US compared to Latin America. It's the people that will stand outside the stores here every day, the stores of construction material. That happens all over the country. So our organizations, we defend their rights, and in order to empower them and to be able to encounter all the problems that they have. And some of these organizations are part of Alliance. There are 70 different centers of workers, men and women. They come there every day to a nice place, a safe place where they can look for work. And there's all sorts of employment that can be found there. The people that come to our centers, they are immigrants from Central America, most from Mexico and from Central America, and also from Africa, Ghana, Cameroon. It's quite diverse, actually, especially on the East Coast. Most of them are people who come from, they're workers from very poor populations and financially poor. So they make a living offering all they have, their labor, their hands. So we start then to talk to these brothers and sisters from the South. And the reason is that our members here in the United States, they were being deported in a massive manner during the Obama administration. Our understanding is that there's always been this on both parties, there's been this war against the immigrants, and that we saw that under President Obama. So then we started coming close to our brothers and sisters from the South to see how they were looking at these deportations. And then, so this was how we began talking, and we came to these corredores. And these were corridors, a lot of suffering, a lot of exploitation. And in our conversations, we saw that it was important then to have connection and really with the help people with justice, because in this bipartisan war, it was becoming more and more difficult the whole time for these corredores. And I mean, sending the message for people not to come. So therefore, that's why we started talking with our brothers and sisters from the South. And as this conversation kept going, more questions were coming up, and we really didn't have the answers. So we needed the students, academia to help us with this. So from the people without resources from our hemisphere, people are really struggling every day. So the pandemic has not only affected the workers in the United States, also the people in the South. The deportations from the United States and also other corredores. I mean, people do migrate from Nicaragua to Costa Rica, people migrate from Haiti to Chile or from Venezuela. So we have these corredores where there's a lot of suffering going on. So our conversations, that was really their purpose, is try to understand all these phenomena and the topic of working rights. There were so many exploitation, many employers, they don't pay their salaries, and they use actually the migratory status of somebody to avoid paying their salaries. And there were some people that got deported because the employer had called migration because he didn't want to pay the workers. So that's how we started having these connections with our brothers and sisters in the South. And we understand that this is a topic, I mean, the topic of migration, it's not going to end, it's going to continue. So we need to find a way to see how we can connect in order to bring justice to this population. It is the population that has kept the wheels of the economy moving during the pandemic. And it's very cruel that how the workers of this country have had to suffer in order for others to be able to live well. And it's very sad. And the only document they get will be a death certificate. It's extremely sad. So we feel that we really need to work, and because it's not a matter of charity or anything. No, if we want to change the circumstances where these migrant workers are moving from south to north and north to south, I mean, all over, we need to look at each other differently. And we feel that here in the United States, and we talk about this, but all are members of this national network daily. I would say that the same love that we feel towards a worker here should be the same love that we should feel towards a worker in Honduras, or Peru, San Miguel, in Mexico, and somebody who's thinking about emigrating, the same love that we should feel for the person that's coming through the desert. So this really inspires us to keep these conversations ongoing and to come closer to our compañeros from the South here in the United States. I mean, we are an extension of Latin America right here, this country. And we should have started this many years ago to coming together like this and coming closer to each other. And the United States, many people who are working in philanthropic activities, and they finance and help of workers in the United States. Yes, but it's a very complex situation. But I think also it's important to finance the struggle in the South, because that is the only way that we're going to be able to bring justice and peace also to the migrant communities, if the resources can be shared. And also, in order to talk about this, to have a dialogue, we need resources. And I will stop there, leave you with that thought, because our brothers and sisters from the South will give you a description of what is happening there in our Latin America. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Paulo. Now I want to invite Amparo Maraquin Raducci. She's a teacher of communications and culture at the University Central America in El Salvador, so she can help us to understand why these movements like the Corredores of Justice are important. And also, maybe she can tell us a bit about how the investigators of the United States, of yes, how the investigators have encountered this. Ms. Marroquin, Professor Marroquin, thank you so much. Pablo, at the university in California also, it's really been an honor to be able to share this space and be part of this panel with so many dedicated companions, and Professor Juan, Joconda, that since a long time I've been reading and studying their writings. So for me, it's such a pleasure to be here. Regarding the corredores of migration, as Pablo was saying, it's a very recent topic. I mean, if we think of the corredor, we have different connections. And for example, when you say corredor, so okay, you can say it's somebody who's moving quickly, that's running, but it's also to have it's a mandatory route in a determined movement. And now we're also beginning to think of this more systematic way, the path of the migration workers, and this has certain implications. So when we think about the topic of corredor, we also think about the corridors of labor. You see the map here, for example, about the workers, where we move the Latin American workers, where do we go to work in different spaces? And it has to do specifically with this manner of our movement, not only in the region, but also outside of the regions. We see Spain here, but also like El Salvador, it's Italy is a place where the Salvadorian workers have been moving to. So this map is what we are going to try to study, but from a different viewpoint. I want to share now with you 5 considerations regarding the corridors of justice and the challenges that they present. And also our compañeros that are going to speak after me will also be able to continue this topic. But I want to, so what is this? Well, some of this part is very evident, but and we, the professors that we investigate immigration in Latin America, it's something, you cannot think of it from the national states. We need to look at a historical notion. And also from El Salvador and Nicaragua. I mean, makes us understand the notion that this is something historical. The nations were constructed, and then you had these borders, and that those were based on certain interests, but we should transcend this categorization and really think a way how these corridors can allow us to do this. And the second consideration has to do with these corridors of migration and justice, is that we need to understand and really review the conditions of work in the whole region. The rights of workers, they are still a privilege to have that, because there's a lot of discrimination that is happening. And I show you this graph here, which shows how in all the countries of Central America, at least 4 of each 10 workers are informal workers that they do not have any right, no recognition, no access to health care or any kind of benefits, such as pension. You see Guatemala, Honduras, Salvador. Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua, 7 of 10 are informal, and they really suffer a lot of discrimination. A third consideration that I'd like to place here is that we have to, once again, look at this, just as Pablo was saying when we're talking about thinking from the South. We don't look at migration as a problem. No, we should not look at it as a problem. No, as a right that people may consider. It's not an obligation, but it's a right that we should then be able to determine whether we want to do it or not. It's nothing that needs to be stopped and returned. Then we have the whole unfair situation of deportations. And also Pablo was showing these numbers that, as he said, the migration is not going to stop. And more than 200 Salvadorians have been stopped every day at the border of Mexico, United States, more than 2019. And this number keeps going up every year. And El Salvador and many have it working outside, especially in the United States. And the news, 652 workers were detained, and more than half of were underage at the border. So another consideration is that right now to think of migration and think of the corridors of justice for the case of Central America. This implies also to understand that in Central America, we are living not permanently, but more, even stronger, a political situation, a lot of very fragile situation, a lot of polarization. So in this sense, fragile institutions and the erosion of democracy in many of our countries leads us to, or it makes the possibility of the rule of law, it becomes weaker the whole time. And so there's no recognition of these things for the workers. And finally, migration, as Pablo was saying, is not going to stop increasing. Right now, we're almost 4 million Central Americans in the United States, and this keeps increasing because migration is a right that we need to consider. And with this, I am going to close. If migration goes further, as Pablo was saying, the cooperation cannot think in national terms. We have to think of it in regional terms. And in Central America, a decent job with all the rights, well, it's necessary to generate data to understand this from the intersectionality as well. It's not the same to be a Central American worker or to be an indigenous worker or to be LGBT population or so all these elements are important. So if we consider that to migrate is a right, it's not a problem that we need to resolve. So then the thing is, how can we create decent conditions for the migration? How can we then in our countries have a discussion of the portability of rights? And how can we in our countries then have the right of educational reforms which will enable then an education for yes, if we consider that Central America, it doesn't make it possible if we find that it's not possible to have a decent life, or then we need to really form our leaders that allow a political stability that is so necessary in the region. And if migration is going to continue, we need to really see the problem is that the information on migration is very dispersed and diverse, and it's hard to find. And also for the investigation from the corredores of justice, that will allow us to really have more of a place to get the information that we need. That's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Amparo Martin Marducci. Thank you so much. Now, let me see now if all the panelists, Mercedes, Clara, Lidovina, and Fidelina, if you can all perhaps introduce yourself and turn on your cameras. I would like to recognize a group of people that are doing the work to establish these corredores of justice in Latin America. They are planting the seed of this movement. And with us, we have Mercedes Perez. She's part of the Social Commission of Action Menonita in Honduras. And then we have Jose Secao, is Civil Association of Guatemalans Brother Rights, and Lidovina Margarin from the Center of Integration for Migrant Workers, El Salvador, and Fidelina Mena Corrales comes from the Center of Labor Works Without Borders from Costa Rica. Thank you so much, dear friends, for being here with us. So if you could please maybe just take a few minutes to introduce yourselves and what the work is being done to develop this and why this is important for you. Let's begin with Mercedes, please. Thank you so much, Juan de Lara and all the other, everybody else is invited to this important panel to talk about the situation of the labor rights. And as Juan de Lara said, I am leader of from the it's the social action Menonita. We do this important work in order to defend the rights of migrants. And, and although the government and Central America's general prefers to forget about this, our work is centered on to really bring attention to these, to this population, and with different components and humanitarian assistance, because remember the conditions that our population is in, and from there we work with the reinsertion of these people in work and education. We have many young people that unfortunately abandoned the country, and we need to carry out this work, but also the government, the state is responsible for guaranteeing the rights of these people. However, with the indifference that we see on behalf of the state in Honduras, the social organizations like us, we are then providing this response to receive our population in this dignified manner. I also want to mention regarding the situation in Honduras. In Honduras, we have a little more than 9 million inhabitants. We are a rich country. Unfortunately, population is very poor due to the administrations over decades. And right now we have a ruling government, dictatorship, that has this total control of the legislation, legislative powers. So we do not have a democracy. We have lost our institutional rights. So there's impunity in Honduras, and we find ourselves in a very complicated situation where the United Nations, for example, have carried out this study of corruption in public and sector, and it's gone up even 4% more. So it's really high according to the United Nations. And the poverty in Honduras could increase by a lot by the end of this year. So 5% is what it could. So a large number of the population is in a situation of poverty by the end of this year. From there, these permanent migration, we have this migration caravans, as they are called. So it's really people who are leaving, who cannot find any opportunities in the country, and that's their only escape. So our citizens here, they cannot find how. We see a lot of people not only going to Mexico or United States, but also many going to Europe, to Spain, and they're working there. So I believe that you are aware of the thousands of deportations that are being carried out from the US, and also Mexico is also playing the role in this regard when it comes to migration. So the United States will deport people to Mexico, from Mexico deported to Guatemala, from Guatemala deported to our country. And so a lot of Salvadorians and Nicaraguans that also come, and a large number are Hondurans that arrive at midnight. And that is the people who have then, according to Title 42, that they allowed this express deportation. And unfortunately, countries such as Mexico and United States and Guatemala, they are looking at this topic of migration within a framework of national policy. And now it is under this Title 42 and the topic of health, which is allowing, or rather make it mandatory then for people to return to the country while they were supposed to be waiting for an answer to their asylum process, but then from one day to the next during the night, they are, so we are receiving all these people every day without taking in consideration now into all the people that are coming back through the airport. So the humanitarian crisis is horrible. But anyway, I want to, I don't know if I still have more time or they're going to bring out the red card for me. 1 minute, 1 minute. Right. And so the Labor Department, United States, a few days ago was talking about having an analysis about what is going on with the labor situation in Honduras and the topic of migration. They were asking us 3 questions. One was, what are the biggest challenges that the workers and families have in Honduras that will have an effect of migration? Number 2, how can the policies focused on workers then lead to any improvement in Honduras? And third, what can the government of the United States do to increase their support to dignified work and labor rights in Honduras? So we mm, did this analysis and we gave our answers. And these are the topics that we are also analyzing in this group that we have formed in this corridor for justice and the labor rights. And to close, because there's a little time, these answers that we gave to the Department of State regarding what are the main challenges that our workers are encounter. Well, we have salaries that are not enough for cover basic needs of a family, and and this has to do with the index of the country. And then since the price of food and the balance of commerce and also balance of payments. On number 3, then just, I also want to say that we have considered that the government of the United States really should promote the respect of the laws of the country, in this case, and also to establish the labor rights and guaranteeing dignified salaries, and that the economy of the country should be more dynamic and also counter the drug trafficking and violence of the country. Unfortunately, they are not addressing the causes that are behind this permanent migration, while the government of the United States and Mexico that has also now been supporting this, they are not attacking the real causes that there is a situation. And then each day there are going to be thousands of people that are going to be looking for the American dream and being violated of the human rights. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, colleague. And now, before going to Clara, I do want to mention that if someone in the audience has any kind of question, you can put it in the Q&A session, which is in one of the chat windows. You can ask a question there, and then we're going to try to answer the questions once all the panelists and finish giving their presentations. So to continue, we're going to Clara. Please, colleague. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone who's present. My name is Clara Patricia Compuac. I'm from the Asociación Civil Guatemaltecos for Our Rights. We are an association, a civil grassroots that was born 10 years ago, founded by workers that were taken out of the temporary farming project because of suing an employer who was assaulted a worker. Our founders were witnesses of how an employer was assaulting some worker from Mexican descent, which they found were very unjust, and they decided to sue them. And because of this, they were taken out of the temporary farming project. And because of this, we continue to fight for human rights and working rights of the workers that are constantly being violated, mistreated by the employers. As is known in Guatemala, there's a lot of lack of opportunities for formal employment. The majority survive and maintain the family through the informal work, but it also doesn't bring a dignified quality of life. This is a main reason why people migrate to other countries. And because of this need, the fraud and recruitment exists through temporary work. And due to that, the contractors take advantage of the needs that people have. Many times they offer them an opportunity to travel to US and Canada, and many times, for not saying everything, they just take their money to these people. These people find this money after having working with these informal jobs that sometimes they even take out loans to pay the amount that these contractors ask for, only because they have that desire to travel to give a better life to their families. This is the main reason why the people access to make payments. When someone comes here and says they have the opportunity to travel and they ask for a certain amount of money, all the people begin to give it, and they find a way to try to get that money together and give this money to this contractor, which at the end disappears, and the money that was given is lost completely. Of the people that end up traveling, they end up encountering many difficulties finding work, because they're exploited, mistreated by those same employers. Many of them suffer violent acts, but no one says anyone because they're afraid to be kicked out from the list of the traveling workers. When a worker is assaulted through the employer, they cannot speak. Practically, they have this fear of saying if they are assaulted, they're going to be banned from the program. And then how are they going to maintain support economically their families? And many times they head out there with debt. So they already have that in their mind saying, I have to pay the debt. So then they don't speak about all the assault. They just endure all the bad treatment that the employers do to them. There were three emblematic cases of people that were taken advantage of by employers, and these people were taken to US and Canada for these high payments and these trips that had never happened. Because of all this, some have implanted a safety food project that was done to many different communities, because the women are the ones who have the least opportunities to travel and even less to find an employment, formal employment. At the moment that the person inside the family, the husband, could find the opportunity to travel, the women are the ones who stay here in Guatemala, becoming responsible of the family, of the children, because in many occasions, the husband can sometimes doesn't find work. Sometimes some travel with people that are out on the desert. So practically they only hope that the person arrives there well and finds a job, the family in Guatemala. So then the mothers are in charge of the family. And because of all this, they created a food safety project for these women, maybe not to solve their problem, but at least give them some relief to those homes that have a lot of difficulties. We require the employers to treat their employees good so they don't suffer of any violence or mistreatment by them, since they migrate only because they're searching a better life, to have a dignified life, to give their family a dignified life and their children, and that they comply with all these responsibilities to respect their rights. And even during the pandemic, they still travel to US and Canada to make sure that these countries could have something to eat. And it is true, we all have the right to migrate wherever we want or have to. We shouldn't be banned from our communities for not having the opportunities. Before being migrants, we are all workers. Thank you. Thank you very much, colleague. And now we're going to continue with, let's see who's on the list. Lidovina Margarin, who comes from El Salvador. Hello, good afternoon. I want to greet everyone. Yes, it seems super important in this space so that organizations that we work with in our countries can share, and in particular, the space with the university. And Mitra is an organization without in nonprofit that has their mission to look at two populations, which are the ones who have returned, those who migrate, and then sometimes do 3 or 4 trips trying to stay in the United States, and also to workers, men and women of low income that are called independent workers or for self workers, and those are the two populations that we work with. But initially, from the beginnings of the organization, the main inspiration was the migration population that is being arrested and then deported to El Salvador, that when they return, they don't have any options to be able to start their lives again. So then, for that reason, the organization saw a need to give support for this group of the population. And because of this, we've continued working with them. So then this population is quite big in this country. We have a migrant flow that is constant, and not even the pandemic has stopped it or any other deed of nature. And now, with all this, with the political situation that we're seeing in the country, people continue to migrate because there has been more unemployment and a lot more, how to say, closing of social problems of which the people used to receive some benefit. And in some way or another, this has made kept them in the country. Now we don't know exactly what the figure of people who leave the country, nor do we know the figure of return coming back to the country, because all the programs that permitted the access for that information through the organizations, well, were closed off because of the present government. And since we are a country of migrants, of transnational families, the reality is that we have more a third part of the El Salvadorian population is outside of the country, and the work that we try to do is enormous, really. So then we have to articulate what we're doing with the local governments and other organizations of civil society, with academia, with cooperative agencies within the country and in foreign. And that's why it's important to have this event with all of you, because it's very necessary to promote, to share data and the studies about the migration situation so that the decision making can be made not just from the point of view of the organizations, but also with other organizations that work with us. So what can I say? As far as the integration of the worker migrants workers, well, I'd like to say that we are members of the Corredores for Justice, Agent of Justice. I feel that this corredor space is very important, where we dedicate time, whatever's needed, because it permits us to take action together with other organizations from other countries, from Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, US, also, and beyond. So then I'd like to give you thanks for this space. Thank you very much, colleague. And now we continue with Fidelina Melocolares that comes from Costa Rica. Yes, well, good afternoon, good evening. It's great to participate in this and also to talk a little bit of the information that we have from Costa Rica. Since, as was indicated, we belong to the Center of Labor Rights in Costa Rica. It's an organization of workers, migrant workers, of all type of migration that we've had here in the country. And contextual, to give you a bit of context, Costa Rica is pretty far south with limits with a border with Panama, and we are historically country, mm, although we have many Costa Rican people out in foreign countries, but we are a country with devastated changes, and every time with the humanitarian crisis, it turns into different arrival of people. I'm going to present 3 slides to be able to give you the context a bit of the situation we live in. We are, as a human rights worker, we look at the worker situation, but also documentation, because people without documentation is very complicated for them to be able to integrate into the workforce. Presently, Costa Rica, we have all, all immigration from South America, with refugees from Nicaragua, El Salvador, from Guatemala and Honduras. We also have refugees from Colombia and Venezuela. From 2019 to 2021, we have an amount of applicants for refuge 130,000 people. 130,000 people in a context of 5 million that are that need to find work so they can continue with their circumstances and then integrate themselves to the workforce so that way they could push forward whatever that has to do with nutrition, housing, and their studies. We also have a migration north-north, which are extracontinental from Congo, Angola, Sierra Leone, Caribbean countries like Haitians, many other African countries. I indicated some Venezuelans and Cubans that also are in transition through the country because of that situation, north to north, that comes from South America, in a good theory. And I could say in parentheses that are heading to the United States, we have a flow, monthly flow of a minimum of 2,000 people. 1% of it approximately stay in Costa Rica. Being that the case, it's not a big load for the country, but it does generate some complications that we will see. We have a work migration, which is temporarily in the coffee and citric that are brought from companies. And some of them we do mention that we are a destination country, but then we have more than 500 more thousand countries, and then with 25,000 people that don't have the possibility of any document to show that they are illegally here. Why the country with all the private companies, they also try to bring more temporary migration for coffee, saffron, and citric harvesting. And these are the things that we are doing and we're looking into. And it's part of the policies that the government, together with private companies, do put themselves in a position during the harvest time. At this moment, we have a time bomb in Panama, Costa Rica, and South America, and that is migration in transit. And these panels have been talking about the humanitarian crisis that is in Mexico and in the United States. That humanitarian crisis have passed through Costa Rica, and confronting the humanitarian crisis that we could visualize through the communication that is occurring between Mexico and the United States, the migration is no longer pushing forward and is staying stuck in those countries that have more possibility of resolving their work issues. So it's turned into a time bomb, as we've called it, because at this moment it's a migration that is invisible because the governments don't want any of these people that are in transition, that they don't want them to stay within the country and be able to give them temporary any migration status, even if it's temporary. This is on a migration of no one because no country wants it, but nor, and this is like a overlapping racism, but they also don't want politically directly speak sincerely with the countries in transit and the United States to say, well, the migration wants to leave to the United States and the migration is going to the United States because they know that politically it is not what the United States is searching for. And these countries are lending to create more of a humanitarian crisis because the step is free, even though even though politically and the discourse is that it's a migration that temporarily is closing off in the borders for the migration. However, that's why we're saying that it's a migration without any documentation to be able to have a temporary kind of remedy. It's just to let them pass from one place to the other through the human traffic when they leave them at the hands of the trafficking of humans so they can get to wherever they want to get with a very complex situation in the migration sense. These people were there yesterday. We saw a big group of people from different countries, Haitians, that we would have to bring them to a refuge to, and then when they make it to migration, they say they're not going to get the documentation and ask them, convince them to leave. So they we gave some ideas of this population. That line you see there is this morning to see if they have a possibility of getting some sort of regulation between these things that could happen in Costa Rica all come to improve their economic situation. This is a person that's searching for refuge because politically they cannot stay in their country or because they're being persecuted. And at the end of the day, they have to work, whether it's temporarily or transitory or permanently. This is economic migration. People should be able to work so they could be able to survive in this country because there is no other type of help for the state so they can keep themselves, support themselves until they get the documents. They want to integrate, even if it's just temporarily, these populations. Before this humanitarian crisis between Mexico and the United States, the populations are no longer pushing forward. And you will all notice about the migration crisis that it's going on the south because the populations are already remaining in those countries. And we have to help them in some way regarding their human rights while they are in our countries. It exists permissibility from the police so they can pass, so as not to stay in Costa Rica and to close the borders. It's more of a political situation that is overlapping because before the other governments, they manifest that we have closed borders for those populations, that there are no controlled flows, but that is not true. We are in the middle of San Jose where the buses arrive for these people can get to the capital to continue on north to Nicaragua, and the amount of flow between 7 to 8 buses that come from the Panamanian border is of an amount of people that are heading north, and some of them stay, as I indicated, in Costa Rica. That would have to be shared. I wanted to share this to all of you so you know of the situation in Costa Rica. It's a it's a situation, the purpose is going from one end to the other end, and you don't know what is happening in Costa Rica. And we have to use this society, civil society, with plenty of help with all this population that's coming from foreign countries of all types. And we don't want to leave out the indigenous populations and then that come for the coffee harvest, which is 50,000 people that enter starting from this date for the harvest of coffee with the purpose of selling the coffee itself and also exploit it because coffee is $1.25 when you measure the coffee. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And before reaching the part of this event where we're going to have questions and a large discussion, I want to then invite Professor Gioconda Herrera Mosquera. She is from Latin American Faculty of Social Sciences. Please, if you could talk to us about the deportations from your perspective and also talk about the work that is being done in the corridors of justice, such as been mentioned now also during this panel. Yes, good afternoon. Thank you so much for this invitation, Professor Juan de Lara, and everyone who's making this this necessary discussion possible. I was so happily well, surprised, because I think it's so important to think in a hemispherical aspect and really make this migration visible, specifically the indigenous migration. I want to share with you some pictures here. The titles are in English, but I'm going to be speaking in Spanish. And so we have been investigating the indigenous Ecuadorian deportations. So then from after Central America is the largest group of people that are deported after Mexicans and Central Americans. So this is a migration that has been ongoing since 50 years, but it's been really sort of made invisible. So this is a project that we have been developing in order to learn of the effects in uh, these communities, Andes of 3,000 meters height, how the measures that are taken affects them. I mean, how what happens in North affects the daily lives of these families. So the people who have been deported, I mean, the way this has direct impact on their families, their communities, how thousands of miles away from there. But it's also interesting looking at the process of resilience and integration, and what this can then bring to these families that have this experience of returning, and also of integration and psychological aspects. So we find it very interesting, this idea that I believe we share now with this corridors of justice in this hemisphere, to visualize the Andean immigration to the United States that has really been made invisible. We don't know much about it yet. So here's just a bit of information of the migration of the Cañari. That is a group that I work with in the mountains of Ecuador and the Andes. And we know that it's mainly men that used to, but the number of women has been increasing, because there's also now women that, like the Cañari call it, the path. The path, what it means, it says the illegal path from Ecuador, then through Colombia, Panama, and all the way until you reach Mexico. This is a path can take 2 or 3 months, and now it's taking much longer. As this migration, well, these are workers, construction workers, street vendors. They work with the house cleaning, then in particular the women, and they have been suffering a lot of this process. Like a lot of the Latin American or Latino immigrants have suffered this. People who come in undocumented and are being seen as illegal and being criminalized. This whole process of criminalization of the migration is affecting this invisible immigration, and it's taking away power from them. And this is precisely why contact with groups with a lot more experience of the struggle is so important. So the numbers are then of deportation quite low. However, for the country, and since this is from a very localized migration, then the impact is much higher. And just very briefly, some numbers of what has been happening. We see this enormous growth. If we look at then 2018, how this was doubled in 4 years, and just as this growth of the migration, there's also this enormous growth of detentions. There's a record detentions at the border only of the Ecuadorians. These numbers we had never seen before, this boom. And that's, of course, is also the case in Central America. And I think this is really important to identify about 40,000 Ecuadorians, and mostly from Cañar, indigenous that speak Quechua, are the ones that have been detained in these past 6 months. So it's very important to really make this group visible. Regarding the people who have been deported, we have seen a growth in the numbers that we have received lately. In Ecuador, we have now, there used to be one plane a month. Now it's been 2 planes weekly of deportees. So the effects, well, I don't have time to talk about it really, but I believe these were the most important parts. And I can also share with you our research, but I just wanted to finalize. I don't want to take up time from the discussion, but just some ideas on how I look at what can be important that we should keep in mind regarding to this hemispheric corridors of justice. Amparo already mentioned some parts of this, but I think it's so important to connect this migration from further south with this corridor south-north, but also it's important to connect what was shown recently in the case of Costa Rica. We see this growth, very important growth of this immigration south-south between the regions, and we see the corridors of transit like Venezuelans and Colombians that are not only, I mean, they are moving throughout Latin America. These are things that we need to really focus on. So, and it has to do with the empowerment of the migrants and their own voices and their organizations through interchange between organizations. I believe that could be really an important goal for this initiative. And also, I believe, is to accompany them on their path, because many of them, they travel on their own with the coyotes, of course, the smugglers, and we know what this means, but also to accompany them in the return. Because when Ecuador, one of the challenges has been that this whole population that are deported, they do not get any kind of support. And I believe that finally, it's important to produce information about these corridors. I think that would be vital. And I will stop there, just throwing out all these different ideas. And thank you so much for this invitation. Thank you so much, dear compañera. And now I want to see if all the panelists, everybody who just introduced themselves now, if you can maybe please put on your cameras. And I don't know if anybody has any question for anybody else. Let me see, perhaps anyone here in the audience may have a question for one of the panelists. You can ask that question today. We also have several professors that are here with us. And if you have any questions, I don't know if anybody, perhaps any one of the panelists has a question or would like to maybe say something. Yes, Daisy? Could you maybe introduce yourself and ask your question? Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentations and all this information you have shared with us. And also to focus on this migration south-south and what happens to the people who are deported and sent back to their countries of origin. This is such an important conversation, and I'm so happy that we are talking about this. I've been listening to several. Daisy, maybe you can introduce yourself. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm Daisel Reals. I am a professor, assistant professor of Department of Sociology here at the University of the South of California. And I work with migration South-South and Latin America and the formulation of migratory policies of several of the countries in South America and Latin America. So my question was sort of connecting several things that came up in different countries. And just like this is something very wide, I know, and I hope you will understand my question. And it has to do with how to accompany the people who return the countries of origin, either voluntarily or because they are deported. And something that sort of stood out here is that the institutions of Central America and Central South America are fragile at times. So one thing that I was thinking about, how can we help the integration of the people that are deported? And I mean, it's important to have them public policies in order to for the integration of the people that return. So one thing that came to mind for me is that in Uruguay and Argentina, I know that several pro-immigrant leaders that were in the government, they used a strategy that I don't, whether it might work in another country or not, but my question is geared towards that. So what they did was to connect the history of the people that had migrated to United States and to Europe, and they encountered discrimination and racism and also deportation, and all the suffering that these policies generated, the anti-immigrant policies in the northern part of the world. And then they connected this, the immigrants who are coming to their countries, in the case of Uruguay and also in Argentina. So this way, connecting these two flows, the ones that were leaving and being discriminated, then had to come back, and people coming from other countries, they were creating like a compassion in between this group, sort of looking at the humanity at the migrants that were in transit, that were arriving. Do you think that this option could be a possibility in your countries, Ecuador, South America, Central America, and other countries that were mentioned? Mm, well, considering the corruption and how fragile the institutions are in the states, how do you think this will be possible? What would the challenges
No sé
be?
si alguien del panel quiere
I don't know if anyone here in the panel would like to respond.
Pues si quiere puedo comenzar yo ahí
Well, I can begin, and then maybe somebody else can follow.
como nosotros aquí
Right.
en los Estados Unidos
Here in the United States,
trabajamos con organizaciones que defendemos
we
a la gente
work
que está en
with
proceso de
organizations
deportación.
that were defending
Ese
people
tipo
who
de
are in the process of being deported. It's case
podemos
by case.
tomar
Sometimes
políticas
we're able
políticas santuarios
to
a nivel local,
assist.
¿verdad?
Well, it's more at a
Muchas
local level,
veces
not state level so much, but
muchas veces
and
la manera que
also
nosotros pensamos
the
acá
way what we
es
are thinking
de
about
que
this,
ya
and that some
la
people
persona
think,
deportada,
is
aunque
that
haya
when
tenido
somebody
esa
is
persona ya no existe,
deported, it's like that
ya
person doesn't exist
se dice
anymore.
que no, ya
Okay,
hice lo que
this
pude
is over. I did
para
what I
lograr esa
could
deportación,
to be able to
pero
stop that
cuando,
person's
cuando
deportation. And
comenzamos a ver la conexión
but when we
entre
begin to see the connection,
Centroamérica en
and we
particular,
went to Central
nos
America
encontramos
specifically, and what we
con problemas
found
de acá.
where this was the same stigma as here, because here they believe that the person who's being deported is a bad person who's done terrible things against the society, and that's the reason why the person is being deported. And when we went there with Amparo, and we carried out this study there, and we talked to the people who had been deported from the United States, and they were telling us it was the same stigma. Some people had been living 5 to 10 years in El Salvador, but they couldn't find work as a result of the stigma. So then, okay, but then also it's a matter of resources. I mean, how much is going to be invested for this person in order to have a project or having a good life, a decent life in their country of origin? And I will stop there in order to allow my partner to continue.
Yeah, it just so happens that we've been studying precisely the situation in deportation. I see two risks there from the intervention of the state, as Pablo mentioned, because we saw that, and no, I was saying that the state should help these people, but if the state is going to help with a bunch of officials that have this kind of criminalized mentality, instead of helping them, they're making it worse. So I think there is a very difficult work to do with the officials, the state officials themselves, so as not to reproduce that stigma, and then instead be aware of how fragile, how vulnerable that these people who were deported are when they return. And because of this, we have to act in three levels. And that there has to be a work of or strengthening the organization. I found it very interesting, the experience that we just finished hearing about of El Salvador, of accompanying those processes. So I saw three levels. The first is the great work in terms of mental health that we have to do with people that have been detained with big processes of depression and end up arriving with medication that is interrupted when they arrive in their communities where they have their families, and with the families end up having to do a very great work to welcome them, to embrace them and care for them so that those people can push forward. So there is this psychological level for support in the transition, which is very important. Then the reinsertion of them in their families and their community. We constantly see deported people that say they don't want me. I can't function in the community or go to parties. It's a world that I don't know anymore. There's this whole process of reinserting them culturally in the society sense, that which is very important. It's not just about work. And the third is, of course, intervene in terms of the social laboral insertion. I think those are the three individual, family, and community that have to be worked on in the territory, and that many times the state simply is too far from there. I think in the second place, this idea of the migration memory is something that is exploited very little in the Indian countries and should be done more, because we have this at the moment. We are a country that receives, that has close to 500,000 Venezuelans in this moment in the Ecuadorian territory, and that it is a migrant country. So then we have this kind of living through the immigration, inward, outward, in a very small territory. So we already have a migration memory that we have to work on so as to combat xenophobia, which is a very, very big problem that we are living through in these South American countries. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now, Mercedes?
No se escucha, Mercedes.
Mercedes, we don't hear you. I'm sorry, I had my microphone off. Yes, I was listening to Gioconda and our friend from Pablo. Turns out that we are doing a very important process, a model that we have been developing since 2014. And for us, it is very important, that topic of psycho-emotional recuperation. So humanitarian help in the instant that people are being deported, it's something immediate. But the psycho-emotional recuperation, with that, we have some professionals in psychology, and this is the component that we've been developing since we've been working on this topic. The psychological damage that people come with, they're severe. We have cases of young girls, women who have been raped in that on their way migratory routes, and we have people that have been 20 years in the US and now they return to this country and they don't have anyone. They have, and they come with empty pockets because they left everything in the United States, and now they say, look, I don't have a house, I don't have family members, everything is in the United States, and the only thing I have left is I'm going to take my life. It's to that extreme that we have seen people that have come here and saving lives. On the other end, it is important recuperating the way of life for them. Right now, we're working with Hoina in the rural area that left, abandoned their lands because through the absence of policies from the government that help agriculture and the economy in those areas. And this is a new trend, I have to say. The farmers were not leaving lands, and now they're leaving their parcels of land so they could look for the American dream. Of course, we also have other elements that have to do with this, like narco trafficking, drug trafficking, and forced displacement of peoples. But we do have to look at this topic of way of life, of making a living. And on the other end, we're also working about activism and outreach to the youth that are insisting the government for so they comply with their rights, and then also to protect the families of the migrants in Honduras, and also for them to be activists, to be subjects of policy, of change, agents of change, not just to the person that was given a solidarity help and then politicians only use them during elections. So then I'm going to finish saying that we right now are also asking and requiring the government that the migration topic does not stay just at the capital of the republic or in the chancellor. It hasn't been decentralized. We need the governments to really look at the situation and start helping the migration situation from the local area and creating strategies to help it, and also to look at the topic of wirings as money wiring in these kind of support in different areas. If we did not have these money wiring into the countries, we would be in a lot more difficult situation. While the government continues saying thanks to all the wiring, money wiring, Honduras, not the remittance, then we wouldn't be so bad. The people who send the remittances are assaulted by military police, and all they do is just shoot. So it's very important to exchange experiences. As Gioconda said, I think it's important to give testimonials that motivates other people, and to work regarding lagai, which is also linked with those ways of life and direct recuperation of the social emotional area, and for strengthening the family homes. We have many families that are separated, kids separated from their parents because the mother's in the United States and the child is somewhere else, and then he was deported. And then we have to address that whole psychosocial aspect that I think is very important. Thank you, Khalid. I want to talk about two more points here. One of the things that I see to be very important is that when we're talking about migration, the focus in the United States has always been at the border. Well, what are the policies and the resources that have been invested for the border? One of the things of why we're here today and trying to develop this work of research with colleagues that are connected is because we have to, as Mercedes said, try to look at strategies on the local sense and hemispheric that help us see beyond from the US border, right? And this idea of accompanying the return is not just in terms of like, well, let's follow and let's accompany, but in terms of the studies, how we focus on research so that we don't they're not invisible. Those people, like Pablo said, once they leave, once they're deported, they become invisible. And we have to stop that and address it in some way to try to create of this amplify this research network of community workers that are doing the research and working on this topic. And that's the reason precisely why we're here and why we will push forward. Now, we're almost over with time. I know there's a few questions from the audience. Why not do we just move over to Oema? If you like, Edgar Ortiz, you have a question that you would like to ask. And then after the question from Edgar, what I want to do to see if some of the panelists have something they want to say before ending the event. Edgar. Well, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me fine? Perfect. Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for your contributions to the work. My name is Eckhart Ortiz. I'm an analysis with the Center of Policies for Immigrants from California, and it's very important to note the problems that only come up when once migrants come from countries where the major language, there isn't a lot of experience to provide resources and services, and the problems that causes with being able to give resources and participate with agencies that offer support to families and migrants that have arrived. So I just wanted to know if that, based on your experiences, have you noticed any good strategies or manners on how they can offer support of translation or justice of language through community organizations or other groups that you work with? Thank you very much. So then I invite you to answer that question, but also if there's something that you would like to say before ending the event. Mercedes, I don't know if your hand's up from before, but Fidelina also wants to say something. Yes, thank you. I think the question is very important, just like the rest before. Our countries in the Americas, in Central America, are countries that do not invest in the social cultural aspect of the populations. They are countries that in some way or another, the migration in or out turns into a business. The organization from civil society here and from Corridor and others, what we do is try to help situations being giving subsidies and being solidary with people, because sometimes we assume the responsibility that the state's supposed to have. And with your question in the sense of linguistic investment, there is none right now. They're just interested in the people to speak English and possibly so then afterwards they could go to the United States, because a migrant is already has a lot more value because they're going to bring more remittances to those countries, the ones that do the banning. And in the case of the countries that are destination countries like Costa Rica and Panama, we are countries that when we get the people that are seeking asylum or refuge, like Venezuela, Colombia, from Venezuela, Colombia, and in Nicaragua, because then over there you have income coming in from the United Nations to look at studies, to do analysis, to hire more public servants, to do political infrastructure. In reality, a social investment each day becomes even more cut. Social investments are getting cut. As far as linguistics, there's no interest. In Costa Rica, at least, the Commission to Access to Justice does require that if you're going to do an interview, whether it's judicial, administrative, a person should do it in their native language. And that's where we then have to be litigating all the time. For example, for the interviews that happened yesterday, they had to be done in Creole, and it had to be someone that was who spoke Creole, and they did it. So then we had to go, it wasn't done, so that way we had to appeal, because the words is not the interpretation of what the translator, that is not an official translator of that language of those people. So I would like to add that. Thank you. Well, unfortunately, our time has ended,
30 segundos a Amparo.
but I want to give 30 seconds to Ampara so she to say what she wants to say. I wanted to see, I saw the Q&A. There was a question about that was very important from the Central American country. We're not thinking about receiving refugees from Afghanistan. And I feel like Chukonda also, because she's nodding her head. However, it could be that will be some extra continental that would pass by the region so they could go up. And sometimes they stay for a while trying to or thinking about if they get papers from Central America, Ecuador, and Costa Rica, Salvador, they might be easier to continue on their journey. And that has to do a lot with the providers. And the other thing that I wanted, I do expect in some way we would have to prepare because the governments are not doing it. It was the TPS is a problem that's implicating or that it should implicate to the region to think what we're going to think about to do to while this is not going to improve so we can get a better situation for all these workers. And I just wanted to talk about that element as something important. Thank you again. I love this. Thank you very much, everyone. And I know we have a lot of questions where we don't have enough time to answer, but now I want to conclude this event. And as I said from the beginning, we're just starting the discussion, this conversation and this project of research. And thank you very much. And Don,
migration policies that focus on border enforcement have been a complete failure. And these approaches do not address the underlying inequities that force people to migrate. The US has already extended its border enforcement strategies across the rest of the Americas. The Corredores de Justicia are an effort to develop a bottom-up social justice approach to migration. We look forward to working closely with this movement and to building partnerships with researchers, students, and community advocates across the Americas. Gracias, compañeras y compañeros, y que tengan un buen día. Hasta luego.
Thank you, colleagues, guests, and everyone. Have a good day. Thank you very much. See you later, colleagues. Thank you very much. Until next time. Thank you. Until next time.
Emma, is the feed over?
Hey, Juan.
Are we done? Is it stop recording? Yeah, or are we still recording?
We're still recording.
Still recording, but I'll stop right now.
Okay.
And then Bob, if you could stop recording too. Great job.
That was great.
Yay.
Thank you all. Are the panelists, the people still able to see us, the attendees?
I think so.
Yes, but there's 11 attendees.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
11 attendees.
Hi, 11 attendees.
Great. Well, we'll check in later. Thank you, everyone, for doing such a great job. I
You're
can hear you,
muted, Jody.
Great job, Tifa.
It's like amateur hour over here. Hold on.
Hi.
Let me just remove all these panelists or all these attendees really quick. Hold on.
Thank you.
This is on here. Oh, some of them I can't remove.
Okay.
Oh wait, hold on.
There they go. Marla.
Are the interpreters free to go?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay, good. Everybody's
Awesome.
all of the
Thank
attendees
you.
are gone.
We'll see
Great
you on the
job.
next one.
Great job.
Thank
Thank you so much,
you.
interpreters.
Yeah, thanks. No,
That
that
was
was
great.
Thank
Thank
you
you
all
all
for
making that happen.
Oh my gosh, Juan, good job. You did such a good job moderating.
Yes.
You totally kept everybody on track. You brought all of like the important points back at the end. I was like, yes, it totally